Roman Catholic priests have been cutting themselves a nice thick slice of the action. Father Sundborg responded to a January 14 lawsuit filed in Alaska on behalf of victims of clergy sexual abuse, which alleged that the priest, who was the Jesuits' Oregon provincial in 1990 to 96, covered up the sexual abuse of 43 Alaskan children by Jesuit priests. The allegations are completely untrue, he said. The priests were passing around Native Alaskan boys for their pleasure. Father Sundborg says, nah, ain't so, which is why they've paid out hundreds of millions of dollars. Our decision to file Chapter 11 was not an easy one, but with approximately 200 additional claims pending or threatened, it is the only way we believe that all claimants can be offered a fair financial settlement within the limited resources of the province, said Jesuit Father Patrick Lee, provincial, in a February 17 statement. The statement noted the province has worked diligently to resolve claims of priest misconduct, saying it has settled more than 200 claims and paid more than $25 million to victims since 2001. That amount does not include payments made by insurers. In 2007, the province announced a $50 million settlement between the Jesuits and more than 100 Native Alaskans for cases of sexual abuse involving more than a dozen Jesuits posted in Alaska between 1961 and 1987. So even though Father Sundborg claims the accusations are completely untrue, the Jesuit province of Oregon is in bankruptcy because their resources were exhausted satisfying the claims of these Native Alaskan boys that were horribly abused by horny Jesuit priests in Alaska. But what does abuse really mean? Roman Catholic priest has been accused of forcing a 10-year-old Pennsylvania boy to perform oral sex on him after counseling the fourth grader about misbehaving on a school bus. Sometimes they call it confession, sometimes they call it counseling, but it always involves a sex act. And here we see the priest who was doing the counseling together with his lawyer. The images of Christ, of the Virgin Mother of God, and of the other saints are to be had and retained, particularly in temples, and the due honor and veneration are to be given them, in such wise that by the images which we kiss and before which we uncover the head and prostrate ourselves, we adore Christ and we venerate the saints. Catholics are trained to get down in front of the images of the saints and adore them, and thereby, they say, adore Christ. Once they're down on their knees, the priest has easy work. The commandment did speak against this practice. We see here in Exodus 24, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. And then in verse 5 we see, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them. That was the Bible. But for a priest who's eager to get a sex act with a misbehaving child from the school bus, or really any altar boy, they teach them that it's more important to listen to what the priest tells them to do than to do what the Bible commands. So their churches are ordained with lots of graven images, and they love to prostrate themselves before these images, getting them down on their knees, which is exactly where the priest wants them. The deaf school in Wisconsin. First thing in the morning, Mr. Geyer said we took communion, and as he passed out the communion wafers, I thought about how many boys did he touch with those hands, and all of the germs, all of the filth of his hands. Father Murphy may have molested as many as 200 boys while he worked at the school from 1950 to 1974, according to the accounts of victims and a social worker hired by the Archdiocese of Milwaukee to interview him. 200 sex partners for Father Murphy at the deaf school. He got the boys down on their knees, and after that he knew what to do. Which really confirms Exodus 25, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, which is why they repeatedly refer to these iniquitous priests as Jesuit father. And of course the children are the victims. What a dramatic fulfillment of Bible prophecy. talks about visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children? It happened. There are so many news and juridical accounts of this happening. Now, you're probably thinking they shouldn't have been down on their knees in the first place. Shouldn't have been down in front of the images. And you're right. They should have paid attention to the commandments. It would have saved them a whole load of trouble. But that isn't the Catholic system. To do what the Bible says, instead they want the boys down on their knees. The deaf school was a favorite posting. They were deaf, but they were not silent. For decades, a group of men who were sexually abused as children by the Reverend Lawrence C. Murphy at a school for the deaf in Wisconsin reported to every type of official they could think of that he was a danger, according to the victims in church documents. They told other priests, they told 3 archbishops of Milwaukee, they told 2 police departments and the district attorney. They used sign language, written affidavits, and graphic gestures to show what exactly Father Murphy had done to them. But their reports fell on the deaf ears of hearing people. It's well known that deaf people have trouble communicating with the bulk of people which are hearing and don't know sign language. And the priests took advantage of this with kinky bondage practices. The Vatican revealed Tuesday that over the past decade it has defrocked 848 priests who raped or molested children and sanctioned another 2572 with lesser penalties, providing the first ever breakdown of how it handled the more than 3,400 cases of abuse reported to the Holy See since 2004. The Vatican's UN ambassador in Geneva, Archbishop Silvano Tomasi, released the figures during a second day of grilling by a UN committee monitoring implementation of the UN Treaty Against Torture. Tomasi insisted that the Holy See was only obliged to abide by the torture treaty inside the tiny Vatican city-state, which has a population of only a few hundred people. But significantly, he didn't dispute the committee's contention that sexual violence against children can be considered torture. Legal experts have said that classifying sexual abuse as torture could expose the Catholic Church to a new wave of lawsuits, since torture cases in much of the world don't carry statutes of limitations. Thousands of reported abuse cases, millions of unreported abuse cases. Those priests are busy men, and, according to some legal experts, the sexual practices that they engage in are torture. Which puts the Inquisition in a whole new light. Torture was an integral part of the inquisitorial process, mainly to extract confessions, just as it was part of the systems used by secular courts of the time. Modern historians explain that the Church tried to regulate torture, establishing clear guidelines for its use. Unfortunately, limitations on torture never really work. That's one lesson from the Inquisition and from the recent American experience. It's never hard to justify applying a little more physical coercion once you've decided that physical coercion is fine to begin with. Medieval inquisitors, limited to 1 session of torture per person, sometimes conducted a second or third or fourth, arguing that it was just a continuance of the first. Yes, learned historians state that the Catholic Church has not only used torture on an ongoing basis, but tried to regulate it, limiting inquisitors to just 1 torture session per victim, but sometimes they would continue it over multiple sessions because they just loved the torture. As so many young altar boys have reported in the last years concerning the Catholic priests engaging in sexual bondage and torture practices. And this information on torture comes from Cullen Murphy, the author of God's Jury, the Inquisition and the Making of the Modern World. Omnisexual sex torture by the priests is nothing new. During the months of November and December, I every morning heard the cries of those to whom the torture was administered, and which was inflicted so severely that I have seen many persons of both sexes who have been crippled by it, and amongst others, the first companion allotted to me in my prison. No distinctions of rank, age, or sex are attended to in this tribunal. Every individual is treated with equal severity, and when the interest of the Inquisition requires it, all are alike tortured in almost perfect nudity, says Charles Dellon in Dellon's account of the Inquisition at Goa, pages 93 and 94. Yes, they torture men. Yes, they torture children, and even women, generally in almost complete nudity. Sister Maura O'Donoghue sent the Vatican the results of a multi-year 23 nations survey about such abuse, which was especially rampant in Africa, where nuns were considered safe sexual partners for priests who feared infection by HIV. One 1998 report focused on Africa observed that sexual harassment and even rape of sisters by priests and bishops is allegedly common. A lot of people think that it's safe to go into a Catholic church if you're not a young altar boy, but as we can see, the priests pass around the favors to just about anyone, and most especially nuns. Pope Francis confirms a culture of sex slavery. Priests and bishops had abused nuns. Pope Benedict had the courage to dissolve a female congregation, which was at a certain level, because this slavery of women had entered it. Slavery, even to the point of sexual slavery, on the part of clerics or the founder. It's not just Charles Dallon, not just the BBC, and not just the Los Angeles Times, or the thousands of boys who've been horribly abused by Catholic priests. Now, Pope Francis has confirmed the sex slavery. French nun spills the beans. Christelle said she had suffered sexual abuse at the hands of a priest of her congregation in France between 2010 and 2011. His gestures became more and more inappropriate, she said, adding, "But he kept going until the day he raped me. He was unable to control himself. He had a split personality." Or maybe not. Maybe just a normal personality for a priest. And there are so many more victims out there. Following the Larry Nassar trial, in which more than 100 victims testified about sexual abuse perpetrated by the former Team USA doctor, Michigan legislators proposed a bill that would alter the statute of limitations for sexual abuse cases. The lobby of the Catholic Church is worried about the ramifications of the bill, presumably due to its own history of abuse cases. Lots of abuse, lots of claims, and lots of people have just been damaged, but don't pursue it. But the solution to this entire problem is so very, very easy. Just stay away from Catholic priests. And don't go around their images in those churches either. And whatever you do, don't be down on your knees in front of an image, because once you're down, the priest can so easily take advantage of you, especially if you're a vulnerable young altar boy.